Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Chris Hattingh. Chris, how are you doing?
Goedemiddag. Doing well, thanks. How are you guys?
I'm pretty good. Apologies for starting a little bit late to our audience who are watching live. I made the mistake of showing Hermann a rather amusing video of a frog making a noise, and it it delayed us while we composed ourselves. Hermann, Pretorius, how are you doing, sir?
I'm struggling to compose myself, to be frank. But all I would at this point say was, anyhow. But yeah, so that's it. Yeah.
Yes, it was not our finest moment. Anyway, okay, let's start off with our first story today, and this is well, there isn't much to go on, but it's a tweet from Sunday. And there's been a debate about this for a while now. So this one tweet perhaps suggests an interesting shift in that debate. Helen Zille tweeted on Sunday, "I have to be honest and admit, until fairly recently, I thought there were some decent people left in the ANC with whom we might one day be able to negotiate a new government. That hope is now well and truly dashed. They are all indeed the African national criminals." So, of course, this, as per usual, set off a firestorm because everything on Twitter does. Everyone people are angry on Twitter all of the time. But it does speak to a larger issue. And this is a proposed future for the country in 2024 that some people are very in favor of. Some people believe that the best way to save the country is for the DA to go into coalition with the ANC. The two biggest parties form a government together come 2024, when presumably the ANC drops below 50%. Proponents of this idea say, well, it'll help boost the DA's legitimacy because it'll be in government with this former Liberation Party. It'll help the ANC because it'll have the sort of fiscal discipline that the DA brings and the policy sensibleness. And it'll keep the EFF out of government, most importantly. So this has been the argument. And that together the two parties will be able to flush out the corrupt elements from within the ANC. Now, there has been some suggestion that Helen Zille at least did believe some version of this scenario. Her tweet here strongly implies it, and there's been several comments attributed to her. She has kind of downplayed it a bit as well, so I don't think she's entirely been clear on exactly what she would accept. I think she seems to have implied that maybe a sort of breakaway from the ANC might be able to go to government with the ANC. But anyway, she's now tweeted this. She says, and I don't think she was specific in what the incident was that has decided, perhaps it was the revelations about Cyril Ramaphosa, but she seems to have decided that there really can be no deal with the ANC because there is no good ANC. Hermann, what do you make of all this? What do you make of the argument that the DA and ANC should go into national government together in 2024?
Well, it's a very popular argument. It's a very popular position. Voters like the idea. Donors to the DA like the idea. It's sort of seen as the adult option, where you can save the country by just getting the adults in the room to work together, because no one really takes the EFF seriously as a party of government. So the notion really is that the ANC must in some form or fashion be in government. We can't imagine a South Africa without the ANC in power. I mean, what would that even look like? My word. And therefore, if you want to save the ANC in government, you need the good old nice instincts and influence of the DA. So it's very, very popular with voters. And as I say, with donors. The problem is it's fantasy. It is utter fantasy. It might theoretically have been possible 20 years ago. But there is absolutely no reason to think that it even would have worked 20 years ago, because 20 years ago, the ANC of Mbeki was in the ascendant and incredibly arrogant in their correctness, in their rightness, and so on. So it's just not a feasible option. And Helen is now right on this. And if I remember correctly, a few months ago, she and R.W. Johnson had a back and forth on Politics Web, especially about this very issue. And the article that we are discussing referred to remarks she made in 2019 or a few years ago. But the fact that she has now moved to this position where there is no good ANC left is, I think, absolutely right. I always have fun saying that the ANC is divided into, yes, people are right. There are two factions in the ANC, but it's not the good faction and the bad faction. It's the one faction wants to steal your money and the other one wants to tax your money. So at the end of the day, there is no real good ANC left. So unless things change, unless a new political party emerges, it's simply not a feasible option.
Chris, what do you make of this argument?
I mean, going into coalition government is probably difficult enough in the first place, never mind if you don't even share basic principles in the first instance. So never mind trying to get practical policies going, but they need to be based
Also,
on some sort of shared... Sorry,
when you've built your entire brand on opposition to a particular political party, it's difficult to go into coalition with them.
Yeah, I can see a bit of a pragmatic argument. So saying, oh, look, we're bringing them into our fold and they're going to play on our terms. But I would argue that the current ruling party, the version of the ANC, it's sort of guided by a mixture of two main avenues. One is still a bit of a moral commitment to the ideal of the National Democratic Revolution. But on the other hand, pragmatism in the form of retaining patronage networks and cadre deployment and trying to make sure that we've put people in charge and they'll benefit from that and they should give us the reciprocal rewards as long as we keep each other. So you can't really break that up by rewarding elements of the party with governance and still having access to taxpayer pots and control and all that sort of thing, and the ability to still implement policies. So I admire Helen for coming to this realization, something which the RR has been saying for many years, as tends to be the case, and other people come around to it and see the insights, but it's good that it's happening. And I don't think the DA should stake its future on any sort of quote-unquote reformist part of the ANC, as many in more mainstream media have much to their chagrin and perhaps existential angst experienced in the past week, even with someone as noble as President Ramaphosa. The party is infused, unfortunately, with these elements. So you're only going to give away your own, both your standing and also your practical ability to govern, if you bring them into your fold.
Yeah, I think also, of course, the party would face, the DA in particular would suddenly find itself, especially if it was a junior partner in any sort of coalition, which presumably it would be. Even if the ANC does really badly and gets, I don't know, sort of 35% of the vote or something, the DA is probably still not going to be bigger than it. And so it would be a junior partner, and that would be, well, ask the Liberal Democrats in Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, what it was like to be in government. And man, they really, they'll tell you that it's not always the greatest thing in the world to be in government. Hermann, any final thoughts on this before perhaps we move on?
Yes. Now that, I hope more people come to this conclusion, especially voters. But what I do think really needs to happen is people need to...
Sorry, can I just interrupt quickly, Hermann? We have seen some data that suggests, or at least we've heard some data that suggests very strongly that this is not a fringe view at all. That this is a thing that very, very many voters in the country are actually pretty interested in.
And voters who vote for the opposition and vote for the government. It's one of the findings that from the data we've seen is that the ANC voters have a relatively not too bad view of the opposition in general. And they think that if the ANC in government could be joined by the wisdom of the opposition, it would be good governance and so on. So, but that's, I think, terribly naive. And a disaster zone for South African politics. But I do think that this idea must be actively opposed. It must be popularized to the extent that anyone thinking that the ANC can be in government and the country can start its road to recovery must be shown to be living in cloud cuckoo land. There's no excuse. There's really no excuse to think anymore that the ANC has any better angels of their nature left. If it wasn't clear before the events of the last few weeks with President Ramaphosa, my goodness, it's certainly very clear now.
And you don't have to take our word for it. Trevor Manuel, former ANC finance minister, has said very much the same thing, actually, in some comments he's made to the media fairly recently, which we did cover on this show. Okay, so let us move on to our next story. And this is, I think, this is firstly an interesting story just because it's about how sort of wild west some parts of SA can be sometimes, but also provides an interesting example of the difficulties of what a post-ANC world might look like, where you're going to have a lot of political parties involved in coalitions together, and not all of them are always going to be happy to be on board with each other. So this week, the DA has called for a motion of no confidence in the deputy mayor of the Nkosi Langegibile municipality, and has asked him to step down following allegations that he was allegedly involved in a cash and transit heist that took place last Wednesday. The deputy mayor from the IFP was implicated in this cash and transit heist when there was an ambush on a cash and transit vehicle. And according to the police report, they arrested some men who were found with large amounts of damaged cash in their possession. And apparently these guys suggested that the deputy mayor was an accomplice, or at least sort of the mastermind behind the alleged robbery. So we don't know yet. Still got to go to court. It needs to be tested and all that. But not a great look for for the IFP deputy mayor here. A DA constituency head in the area, Alf Lees, said that if the deputy mayor fails to resign by Wednesday, the DA will submit a motion of no confidence in his role as deputy mayor, as well as calling for this motion to be dealt with at an urgent special council meeting. The IFP, for its part, said the allegations were baseless and without merit. The IFP expects law enforcement agencies to follow all necessary legal due processes in investigating this matter and to bring it to a logical legal conclusion with the necessary urgency. The IFP reserves its right to invoke disciplinary processes at any moment should the need arise, and accordingly the party will be keeping a close eye on the matter. Still, not fun. For anyone involved. So obviously we don't know if the deputy mayor is actually involved, and knowing the crazy world of KZN politics, it's very possible that he might not be, but at the same time he might well be. So Hermann, what do you make of this story?
Well, first of all, if it's not true, I want to give some kudos to those cash and transit heist robbers. I'm relatively politically in tune with what's going on in the country. I don't know a single deputy mayor's name in this country. So if you are a cash and transit heist robber and your get out of jail story is no, we work with the deputy mayor. We work with,
it was all his idea.
It's all his idea. Yes, Deputy Mayor Stabiso Dladla. Yeah, friend of. I mean, the idea that so firstly, if this is not true, well done. Very, very, very creative and politically in tune, and we should possibly get them on the show if they know who the deputy mayor of the Nkosi Langalabalile municipality is. So number one. Number two, the IFP has become terribly worrisome. They voted in favor of expropriation without compensation. They have taken a view that expropriation is okay as long as it's with compensation. They have played a rather dark and malevolent role in especially Johannesburg government politics, working with the ANC, and they've just been, if you're looking for someone to as a counterweight to anything ANC, it's difficult to see that the IFP is that. We shouldn't delude ourselves.
I do want to push back very slightly by saying that the IFP does appear to be at least partially split internally, and that
Yes.
in some municipalities it's actually been very opposed to the ANC, and in other municipalities it's been kind of on board with them. It's very confusing.
Yeah, it's more than split. It's almost quartered, in the sense that you had the national leadership of the IFP after the previous municipal election saying we will work with the ANC, and then a lot of local IFP councillors and elected representatives just said hell no. So you have this schizophrenia of people being both for and against the ANC, both reliable and unreliable coalition partners. And then also you have the party structures not really having much to say to each other on from a local to a national level. That isn't a recipe for success. That is in fact the opposite. There's a case to be made, and I'm not making the argument that case now, but there's a case to be made that the IFP might be the weakest link in the entire Wild Dog coalition. There's some, you can make the point that the DA is relatively committed to the Wild Dog project. You can make the point that Action SA is moving very swiftly in that direction. Freedom Front Plus, I think, way out in front in understanding the coalition politics that needs to make itself real and felt. ACDP will likely go, in the direction that the Spirit leads them, and the Spirit seems to be leading them in the direction of coalition in general. But the IFP is sort of this dark horse of instability that might sink the entire coalition, Wild Dog coalition project, and that is incredibly worrying. I see from Janet Stead a comment here: can Action SA and the DA work together? Well, they are working together. They are in government together in Tshwane and in Johannesburg. Is it peaceful? Is it harmonious? Is it perfect? No. But I'm surprised that some of these governments have lasted as long as they have.
Yeah, I'm also a bit surprised too. I thought they would be more short-lived. But also, I think the question now is not can they work together, but how well can they work together? And the jury is still out on that one. Chris, what do you make of this? What do you make of the way the IFP is going? And what do you make of the political position that any parties might be in when someone does something like this?
I suppose it's instructive as another example of where the incentives lie with one's actions and what you maybe need to do to ensure that things are ever in your favor, and the steps that you need to implement to make sure that you and your party, or at least the people you think are your friends in the party, continue to enjoy some measure of a good life and control and that sort of thing. But that's a countrywide problem, I would argue. That's more an issue of systems and incentives that need to be changed, and one wonders if any particular political party will have the will to break that in any significant way or not, because it's simply it benefits you if you get those levers of power, kind of thing. We've mixed the state and politics, the state and the economy, to that extent that the incentives lie in that way. Regarding the IFP, yeah, one would hope for the Wild Dog coalitions that it can sort itself out, but I'm skeptical right now, especially just because it appears unclear what they want, what they envision, apart from a sort of personal benefaction and satisfaction from being involved in politics. So you wonder what it might take for them to get into a more principled frame of mind.
No, so I think it is the big question now is that when Buthelezi finally passes away or steps down or whatever, because he's still, I think, the president emeritus of the IFP, even though he's not actually its leader. He still has this big role in the party, and the party is still connected to his brand and all that. There's a question as to, can someone take the IFP and take it in a new direction and sort of re-energize it? Because, of course, once upon a time it was, the third biggest party in South Africa in 1994. And it has a history going back to, I think, at least 75, 77, somewhere around there. So it is, I think, a political opportunity for someone in the IFP to rescue it from this sort of mire that it seems to be in right now. All right, let's move on to the next one. And
perhaps just a last point on this. It's people should not be lazy in thinking about how these coalitions will work. They will be immensely complex, and I think they will be beneficial to the country. But there is a difference between the 2016 understanding between parties like the DA, the ACDP, Freedom Front Plus especially, and what would need to be in place in 2024. And I see that many people are trying to make this point that the DA is still arrogant, as I think they were legitimately arrogant at a time of saying, we are the largest party, minority parties just join the coalition, give us the numbers, give us the votes, and we will govern. You can just, be majority fodder. That is no longer the case in the DA. I can say that with absolute certainty, at least not where it matters in terms of the overarching federal strategy. There are at local level, of course, personalities that really just see coalition politics as DA politics. But there is at the top of the DA leadership, and if you listen to Steenhuisen and many of the most prominent voices in the DA, you are starting to see that realization that you don't get to coalition politics equal DA politics. With this
I think this is a thing that's happening sort of quite slowly across the whole country, is the realization that our politics is probably going to look a lot more like Israel's in the next few years, rather than what it has been up till now, where you have one party dominant. More like lots of parties that are barely held together by anything, and very unstable governments. I think that's very likely a possibility that we're
and two very, very quick things on that is, you're absolutely right. I think we've said it on this podcast before. The Prime Minister of Israel currently leads a 7% party. So that should give you an idea that you don't need to, a 20% party is more than enough in a coalition system to play the leadership role.
And it's not like that coalition is entirely aligned on their sort of core principles. You've got sort of quite hardline Zionist principles, participants with basically sort of like the Arab-leaning Arab representing parties that don't really see eye to eye on anything. Got both left and right, but they have this core idea, which I guess in Israeli politics is that the current ruling coalition just doesn't want Netanyahu in power, which is kind of a little bit similar to an anti-ANC coalition.
They feel stronger about Netanyahu not being in power. There's more unity within the governing coalition in Israel about Netanyahu not being in power than the state of Israel existing. So that is an interesting little mini take, because you have these very, very extreme Arab parties with this view. So that's the one thing. And the second thing is that I have forgotten what the second thing was.
Don't worry.
It was a really
it happens,
good thing. It was a really good thing.
It happens to the best of us. We'll just have to imagine how insightful the comments will be.
But it is important to state that this was the second thing. Before the previous national election, the DA ran a very sleekly produced ad where they, looking back in the future, and there was an election result poster saying the DA wins 59% of the votes, and that DA has died. That dream has died. No one really thinks that is a feasible option.
Yeah, I think it's very likely there will never be a party that gets 50% of the votes in South Africa ever again.
Yes, and as we've been saying for time immemorial, the moderate middle of South Africa are small C conservatives. And you've got several parties catering to that. And if you can get a loose, pragmatic coalition, similar to the one that Cape Town had in 2006, at least in bare essence, then you have the small C conservative politicians and the classic liberals with a very, very natural ideological opportunity for coherent government, as I think the permanent coalition between the Liberal Party and the National Party in Australia shows. There is a long-term stable view. Is it perfect? No. But it is definitely doable. And to critics who say that, the idea is that everyone in South Africa should be a classic liberal, well, I would suggest some sort of ear cleaning when listening to the IRR's analysis.
All right, so let's move on to our next story, and this is just an opinion piece written by Claire Bisker, who is the Financial Mail's assistant editor, and she says that what we're really seeing in South Africa is a crisis amongst municipal governments that are essentially collapsing. She had once asked Trevor Manuel in an interview whether he had any regrets about his time as SA's finance minister, and he said that he hadn't managed to do more to fix problems in local government. According to the Director General of National Treasury, who's just left last month, something like 2/3 of all municipalities in the country are in some level of financial distress, and that the Treasury can no longer cope with the extent of the crisis. Claire goes on to say, the situation has become so dire that it threatens the entire country's economic growth prospects. The value destruction in residential property alone is almost incalculable. According to Magnus Haystack, his guess is that well over R1 trillion in the last 10 years has been wiped out, as most small and medium-sized towns have become completely worthless. Of course, the exception to this is the Western Cape, where most of the municipalities remain financially sustainable. And there's a couple around the rest of the country as well, but by and large, there's a lot of municipalities where there just ain't no more money. Chris, what do you make of this? I mean, obviously this gels quite well with a lot of the things we've been saying on the show.
Yeah, if you don't do the work to ensure that services are maintained over years, don't be surprised when things eventually reach the point of complete deterioration. I mean, just pointing to the recent floods in KZN, you wonder if more upgrading and just basic maintenance had been done, how much damage would have been prevented. Of course, no local or national government can prevent any natural disaster from occurring, but they can put the necessary steps in place if they use resources accordingly. Yeah, not a great because people's lives are, the quality of life is deteriorating, but a great example to indicate the pernicious effects of cater deployment and that guiding ideology of the ruling party, how they've deployed people around municipalities and other structures of government to ensure that it's basically just about kickbacks and not about actual merit and delivering services. In a recent interview with David Ansara from the Center for Risk Analysis, Eskom CEO Andre de Ruyter, he talks about a court case around Eskom and municipalities and how if municipalities are allowed to not pay off their debt to Eskom, this might be a gap for them to simply keep more resources to themselves. So you wonder when you hear arguments maybe coming from SOEs, you think, oh, these can't be correct. But I think there's an element there because players in municipalities want to make sure that they can ride off into the sunset without having to pay off anything that they owe to other state companies or the people in terms of service delivery. So yeah, a good piece by Bisseka pointing out again what the RR has been saying for a very long time. And yeah, I guess important to keep in mind some things that we take for granted with things like running water, electricity, paved roads. These things aren't just natural occurrences. They need to be built and maintained. And hopefully South Africa will in at least some places have the parties and the coalitions in place to realize that these basics trickle down, to use that phrase, actual trickle down economics into benefits for people lower down on the economic ladder. If you get the basics right, you reap the benefits. It's not just about high level job summits and investment plans and that sort of thing. Government can do a lot of good if it actually focuses on a proper mandate.
So Hermann, one of the big issues that Bisseka talks about in her opinion piece here is that cater deployment is a big part of the story. Now there is a DA court challenge against cater deployment going ahead, but I don't know. Do you think that that's going to succeed? Presumably, this is the kind of thing where only a change in government could ever actually change the policy.
Yeah, it does feel that the idea of cater deployment will need more than a court case to disentangle that particular web. It is so ingrained in the governing structures and civil service of our country that a court case, while welcome, will by no means be the end of the issue. And there's the real threat that winning the court case, many South Africans might go, oh, that's the end of that. Fantastic. So why? And then the next day, why aren't the taps working? I think South Africa is faced by a structural error, a constitutional error. And I'm someone who generally defends the Constitution as much as I can. But there's a vast disconnect between the responsibilities of local government, the accountability and seriousness with which local government is dealt with by the electorate. But the constitutional issue comes in where the revenue generation is far too centralized. And if you want service delivery at a local level, you need equivalent revenue generation at a local level. And rates and municipal levies and these things, of course, they go some way, but they are a fraction of what is spent in this country and what should be spent in this country on infrastructure improvement, development, and maintenance. So we have this problem of centralized tax revenue and centralized government funding, but decentralized service delivery. And if you are hamstrung as a municipality that really just want to do your best, but the funding from government just isn't forthcoming, from national government isn't forthcoming, there's very, very little you can do. So these are serious matters, but I do think it shows that the bread and butter issues matter. Cutting the grass next to the road matters. And these things, the chickens are now coming home to roost, like with Eskom, SAA, infrastructure. It's all part of the same roosting of some rather sinister chickens.
Indeed. Anyway, that is all the time we have for today. We hope that you found the show interesting. We will, of course, be back for tomorrow. For the Daily Friend Show, please subscribe to this YouTube channel if you're watching there. Please leave us good reviews if you're listening to us on the audio-only platforms. And we hope we will see you again tomorrow. We, of course, have a short week this week because Thursday is Youth Day. But anyway, have a wonderful one. And cheers, everyone.